Just to give an example here, going to Queensland from the ACT, you're asked to fill out a form, and one of the red flags is you had any symptoms of COVID-19 in the past 14 days. The issue being, if you've had symptoms, you should be tested. Now, seemingly even a negative test wouldn't allow you to get in, you'd be blocked, meaning if you've had a bit of a sniffle, the temptation will be don't get tested if you've got a trip booked to Queensland. Is this a concern about these sorts of measures and how they might not actually help?
Yeah, it was interesting, Tom, when you brought this up initially. I had to do quite a lot of research just for Queensland. And the first thing I'd have to say is that the rules are getting quite complex and there's different rules across different states. Look, I mean, on the surface, that rule is absolutely sensible because obviously you don't want people that are potentially infectious crossing over. But then the thing then is it is very reliant on people doing the right thing and not sort of finding ways around it. And one can only hope that we don't get to the point where we're actually looking for sort of perverse reasons because people will try and get around them. But I think that gets to the root of the fact that, you know, really, and the AMA is sort of heading towards that somewhere, as the numbers come down and we look at sort of the ability to travel across borders, that we do need sort of a standardisation across states with regards to cross-border travel rules to make them first up sensible, common sense, but also understandable, but also so that, you know, there is that ability to, you know, they will protect the states and stop spread across the country. So we do need to get to that point at some stage, and that is something that needs to come at some moment.
And everyone understands this sort of, I guess, ultra caution around the incubation of the virus. But if someone had a minor symptom with so little COVID in the community and they got a test and that was negative, surely that should be, you know, a good enough. And that if every state that lifts its borders says if you've had a COVID test, you just need to prove it's negative, that would be a better way of Australia tackling this entire issue.
Well, I suppose it depends on which state they're coming from, and Victoria's still a little bit away. I know the numbers look small, but we still don't 100% know, and there probably is still a little bit more than we think there. And again, in New South Wales, there's probably a little bit more than we think as well. But overall, you're right. I think we do need to get to the point where there is some ability to have some standardisation, understandable and common sense rules that people will accept and be able to, comply with, because they won't have to go, read up and do research every moment to try and work it out.
Yeah, well, if you've got something confusing that people aren't understanding, you've got a problem in terms of these border passes. Anyway, we'll see how that evolves. You've been looking into as well the latest study on severity of COVID cases and a flaw in the immune system that actually is usually more highly represented in men.
Yeah, so it has been noted that people ending up in ICU, intensive care units, do seem to be more men. And there does seem to be a possible reason now, because there is a protein which is part of your immune system. When you get attacked by a virus, you release a sort of a messenger protein called interferon, and there's a thing called interferon 1, which sort of tells other cells to fight back against the virus. Now, for some reason, certain people either don't make enough, it doesn't work, or else your body actually attacks its own interferon 1. So you don't get enough of this messenger to get your immune system going to fight the virus and COVID-19. And there appears to be a genetic basis to some of these cases, and it does appear that men are the ones that seem to be in more trouble, and why they seem to be getting more COVID-19 in severe ways. So this may actually lead to some possibility we can work out who's going to get sick, but probably even better still, possibly a way of potentially treating COVID-19 better.
What, like a synthetic interferon 1? And I'm saying this, you can tell I'm not a doctor, but would that be a sort of option?
Well, I think that's what everybody's looking at the moment. So, in amongst everything else, starting to understand little bits about how it works actually does help us work out potentially how we might go in terms of treating the future. So you're absolutely right, Tom.
A huge difference in seemingly fatality rates depending on where people are getting COVID-19 in the world. And it might not just be to do, obviously, with medical treatment plays a part in it. Break this down for me. So it's cross-reactivity to other coronaviruses. What does that mean, and how is it playing a part?
Well, just look at Europe, for example. Europe, there's an average death rate across Europe of about 19 deaths per million. Now, Now, this varies enormously. Now, Slovakia's got a rate of about 7 deaths per million, but Belgium, when you stretch it out, is about 850 deaths per million. So there's a massive difference. And there is thought possibly that this is due to cross-reactivity to exposure to previous coronaviruses. Now, see, there are other coronaviruses that cause the common cold. And it may be that certain strains of these may, in fact, have similarities to COVID-19, the coronavirus we're looking at now. And in fact, those people who've had that previous coronavirus cold, and what seemed to be a common cold, are now potentially partially immune to the COVID-19, and that may make a difference to how they're coping. And again, not understanding this, which hasn't been investigated, it needs to be looked into more, may actually have some benefit in actually working out whether we can find some treatment or maybe even work out how a vaccine might work better.
Yeah, interesting. Well, a little bit of hope there as well. Just finally, the situation on the wharves here in Australia. Some claims and counterclaims about whether or not the situation, the strike action is holding up medicines. Have you heard anything about this?
Well, look, what I can say, I'm on one of the medicine shortages committees, and all, you know, this had to be set up in COVID-19 because there is a massive problem with medicine shortages in certain groups. Now, look, I can say to you, yesterday I spent about 45 minutes having to try and find a replacement for a medication for a patient because we couldn't get it. Now, I'm not entirely sure whether it's caused by, ability to get it onto the docks, for example, but, if there's anything blocking medications coming into Australia, it is a serious problem and really affecting people on the ground because there are more and more medications we seem to be actually falling down in at the moment. Another group is some of those tablets that we treat for acid. Now, that's partly because one of them actually got banned because of a potential problem with one of the components. But again, that one's another medication which is becoming more of a problem. So we do not need any problems in obtaining medications and getting them to the Australian public at the moment. So please, if something holding it up for other reasons, just understand that the public is suffering at the moment.